Welcome to Things You Don't Know. As we approach the end of 2023, we first and foremost want to wish happiness and good things to our listeners. As some may know, those who have been following us, we have published volume 2 of the book, Things You Don't Know, and it is available through Amazon. It has been an interesting and busy year for us, and hopefully 2024 will bring many more exciting adventures and new information too. In this podcast episode, we are exploring some interesting historical facts about ho, 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 Christmas. We are not going to dampen anyone's spirits with anything negative. We will briefly examine how and why some traditions started and maybe share some personal traditions. Enjoy.
We know the holidays can be challenging for some people, especially those in less than ideal circumstances. Folks, if you find yourself feeling depressed, troubled, or overwhelmed, please don't be afraid to seek help. Many people are willing and able to help. Don't be afraid to reach out.
Everyone knows that on December 25th, Christians celebrate Jesus' birth. Did you ever stop to ask why Christians selected that date? After all, the date of Jesus' birth is really unknown. As far as I have been able to uncover, the first time Christians celebrated first as Jesus' birthday was apparently in the year 3036, a few days ago, in Rome. Romans celebrated the winter solstice on December 25th. Emperor Constantine had legalized Christianity 23 years before the first celebrations. Christians associated Jesus with the sun, which is also associated to some extent with the winter solstice. So it was pretty reasonable to co-opt that date.
What about Christmas trees? I've always been curious, where did the idea come from and what are some of the symbolisms? I have read the Christmas tree itself originated in Germany and perhaps in Norse traditions.
Well, as usual, Dr. Nadine, you are spot on. However, there are some traditions which predate Christianity. In ancient times, plants that remained green even in winter symbolized the hope and expectation that a new and fertile spring was coming. Many people in those old days decorated their homes with evergreens, believing they kept evil spirits at bay. The ancient Egyptians worshipped Ra, associated with the sun. The Egyptians thought that Ra got ill in the depths of winter and decorated with evergreens, symbolizing Ra's recovery, which they believed heralded the spring. Similarly, the ancient Romans celebrated the winter solstice with a celebration called Saturnalia to symbolize the ongoing nature of life. The Druids, the Druids, decorated their temples with evergreen boughs. The Vikings had a special place for mistletoe. In the North legends, Balder, who was the god associated with beauty and light, and who was impervious to injury by anything except one little thing, mistletoe, was killed by a blind man throwing a piece of the mistletoe at him. Well, the mistletoe is a remembrance of Balder and may have something to do with the tradition of kissing under a mistletoe. Now, Germany was the place where the modern version of Christmas trees originated. Records from the 16th century show that decorated Christmas trees were brought into German homes. Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, is often said to have been the first to decorate the trees with candles. I mean, that just sort of chills me because, Christmas trees, especially when they get a little dry, are very flammable. Anyhow, the candles were purportedly to symbolize the stars and the light of hope and love.
Since Christmas trees became acceptable in the United States, there are two different national displays of trees that have become very highly recognized. On the East Coast here, many people know about the tree in New York City in Rockefeller Center. That's a standard sight in the Christmas season, but I know there's another display very dear to your heart, Doctor.
Indeed, the the national display. By the way, we are still on the East Coast with this. Um, is the National Christmas Tree and the associated Pageant of Peace in Washington, D.C. At the Pageant of Peace, the national tree is surrounded by a tree from every state, every territory, and the Native Americans for a total of 56 trees in addition to the national tree. There is also a stage where famous and local performers too put on short shows. Usually there are between 400 and 500 performances during the month of December. I actually performed there once.
That sounds like it must have been very enjoyable. There's another tradition we just can't leave out of our survey: Christmas carols. We often think that Christmas carols have been around for a very long time, and a few have been around since Victorian days, but most of the carols popular today are actually fairly recent.
Yeah, indeed. John Horvat II, in his book Return to Order, wrote a poignant piece about the origins of the Christmas carol, Silent Night. Yes, indeed. It is a somewhat convoluted story and starts with the Prussian King Frederick William. He heard the song at a Christmas Eve celebration and he said, who did this? This is really pretty. He looks at it and the composer is listed as unknown. So he asks the choir director, Felix Mendelssohn, you've heard of him, and he couldn't shed any light on the origin of the carol. So the king called the head of royal courts, Ludwig, who also had no idea who the composer was. So the king instructed Ludwig to go and discover the origin and the composer. Well, okay. So Ludwig goes and scours libraries and repositories. Didn't have any success. Nobody knew. It occurred to him that the style of the music seemed Austrian. So he went to Vienna to continue his search. He was not having any luck. So he says, oh gosh, and he's going back to the Prussian court. On his trip, he stopped for the night at an inn. And while he was eating dinner, he hears and he goes, oh, and he asks the innkeeper what that was. And the innkeeper says, well, it's the bird here. He sings all the time. And he said, well, where'd you get the bird? And he says, from the abbey at Salzburg. Well, okay. So Ludwig says, oh, okay, got a hot lead. He takes off for the abbey with some renewed hope of not disappointing the king, which is kind of an important thing. None of the monks at the abbey had any idea who might have taught the bird to sing. And when Ludwig suggested, well, maybe it was one of the monks, the abbey got a little upset because guess what? Monks are not allowed to have those kind of shenanigans going on. As he was about to give up, some teacher named Priestainer, who had heard the bird warble the tune and was able to imitate the bird. So he sat by an open window and whistled the tune. And suddenly, a young boy comes rushing out into the courtyard saying, little bird, you've returned. Priestainer questioned the boy who said, yeah, he had taught the bird to sing the song, and that his father, Franz Gruber, had written the song. Priester went and talked with Gruber, who said he had composed a song, but a priest had written the lyrics. So Gruber told Priester that on a Christmas Eve, a young priest was preparing for a Christmas service when a peasant knocked on his door and asked him to come help a newborn child. The priest immediately went and gave aid to the child. As the priest was returning home, he reflected that this was similar to the birth of Jesus and wrote down a poem. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, etc. The next day, the priest showed his friend Gruber the poem, and Gruber immediately sat down and wrote the tune to the lyrics. The mystery was solved.
That is a really beautiful story. No look at Christmas carols would be complete without looking at the history of the only carol to have ever won an Oscar. Of course, that's White Christmas, which won an Oscar in 1942 for the movie Holiday Inn. The song, written by Irving Berlin, has been sung by a host of famous singers, most notably Bing Crosby. It's unfortunate and ironic that Christmas was always tinged with some sadness for Berlin, as he lost an infant son on that day. There's a story about a group of carolers going by his home, Berlin's home in Greenwich Village, singing White Christmas in the late 1980s. As the story goes, Berlin was feeling very glum. His maid invited the carolers into the house, and they talked with the great composer, and this cheered him up.
Another Christmas carol, and my father's favorite actually, is O Holy Night. Now, the basic facts of the song's history, they're very clear. But there's a whole great mess of intrigue and unverified history. Let's go with the stuff we know. A poet by the name of Cappeau in the town of Oromar, France, was asked to write a Christmas poem in 1843. Now, Cappeau wrote the poem as he had been asked to do, to commemorate a new church organ. He then asked Adolphe Adam to compose some music for the lyrics. The piece debuted in 1847 under the title of Cantique de Noël and became very popular in France. Okay, so now here's where things start to get a little cranky here. John Sullivan Dwight discovered O Holy Night in 1855 and brought the song to the United States. Dwight changed a few lyrics, adding in the verse, "Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for a slave is our brother. And in his name all oppression shall cease." Now this helped establish the piece as an anti-slavery song. Now here is where it gets real wanky and speculative. It's been reported that Cappeau was not only not a Christian or a religious man, but that he was sort of not very happy with the church. So after he wrote the lyrics to O Holy Night, he is said to have denounced the church and joined a socialist movement. Okay, not something that pleased the church in France. Likewise, there are publications that say that, Adam had been, anti-church for quite some time. Now, having a popular Christian church song whose author wasn't religious or who didn't celebrate the birth of Jesus was unacceptable to the Catholic Church in France. So the song was banned for more than 2 decades. It's really weird how that all fit together.
Some very interesting ideas were also presented in the history press by the Reverend Lawson Jones. He notes two very different takes on the holly and the ivy. Often this carol is presented as the berries representing the blood of Christ on the cross and the sharpness of the holly plant symbolizing the crown of thorns. He also notes the holly and the ivy could also represent the battle of the sexes, with the holly having masculine qualities and ivy feminine. The imagery could have been part of an older tribal tale that developed into a dance for young men and women when they were courting each other.
That's wild. In that same article, the Reverend notes that although the lyrics of Hark the Herald Angels Sing stemmed from religious beliefs, the upbeat, familiar tune that we know today has a different origin. In fact, the tune was composed in the mid-19th century by Felix Mendelssohn as a cantata to commemorate the 300th anniversary of Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. Okay, we could go on and share many stories about Christmas carols, but then we wouldn't have time to look at some other aspects of this holiday.
You're quite right. It's a fascinating topic of its own. But looking at the origin of our nation's most beloved holiday is a source of real joy for me. Christmas is celebrated worldwide and has in fact undergone a revival in countries formerly behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe. If you want details about individual national preferences and customs, please listen to our wonderful holiday podcast. I was very surprised and pleasantly to hear about the origins of many things we take for granted in our very consumer-oriented 21st century world. Now, as a historian, I was aware there had been a time when Christmas had not been very popular or even allowed in many parts of the United States. New England had largely been settled by Puritan separatists who had left the United Kingdom and the Church of England, what we call the Episcopal Church in this country, because of what they saw as its watered-down adaptation of Catholic practices, altars, priests, communion, including the celebration of Christmas and Easter, two holidays not mentioned or commanded to be celebrated in the Bible. In 1659, the General Court, the Massachusetts colonial legislature, went so far as to pass a law fining anyone caught observing Christmas by refraining from work or feasting 5 shillings. Now, in that time, my friends, that was a day's wages for an ordinary male worker, so this was a lot of money. The legislature, in keeping with its Puritan beliefs, believed that those truly in a covenant with the true God had to see every day as holy and sacred, thus allowing for no differentiation and no celebrations. After American independence, some newly independent people in America denounced the holiday as a British custom to be abolished and rejected along with the monarchy. One argument against celebrating holidays, and Christmas in particular, was that the United States had won its vital revolutionary victory against the Christmas-celebrating British and their intoxicated Hessian allies at the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey in 1776.
Thankfully for advertisers, corporations, and families nationwide, a more relaxed viewpoint prevailed in the non-Puritan South, Catholic Maryland, and Quaker Pennsylvania. By the 19th century, attitudes began to change about Christmas. This new flexibility was due, in some parts, to Charles Dickens' masterwork, A Christmas Carol, which demonstrated the repentance of miser Ebenezer Scrooge. The book struck a chord, and the holiday began to be observed nationwide in the 1840s in both the UK and North America. The wonderful film, The Man Who Invented Christmas, explores Dickens' financial and personal struggles during the book's writing. Many other wonderful traditions began during the 1840s. For example, Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert, had popularized the custom of the Christmas tree. Caroling had come out of the Catholic wassailing tradition of the Middle Ages, and some other things too.
I share the recommendation of that film, my friends. It's absolutely wonderful. The balls often placed on the Christmas tree began to be mass produced in the late 1850s. Originally, these had been apples, which symbolized the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. There is another possible symbolism to these apple-like globes. The tree of light or life, depending on the translation, is referenced not only in Judaism and Christianity, but in all the major religions. Therefore, the symbolism brings light into the world. Candles and electric lights are used, therefore, to decorate trees. These are thought to represent the divine light of God, but as you pointed out, they're very dangerous. Candles can burn, and apples are very expensive. So for cost and safety reasons, balls seemed a better choice. Each of the colors put on the tree has a very different meaning. According to the website, Christmas Balls, their origin, their history, and their meaning, red symbolizes love and charity and is a reminder of original sin. These are considered the luckiest of the balls, so there's a custom in the Midwest of the United States and throughout Canada to make wishes on the red balls for them to come true in the new year. The white balls represent faith, both in the Almighty and human beings, as well as purity. These have become more popular in the last few decades. Golden Christmas balls offer an opportunity for earthly wealth, as well as the possibility for previously unrecognized people to obtain success in their work life. I have to say, I could use a few of those. Green balls are a living reminder, even in times of great difficulty and stress, to maintain hope. The United Kingdom's Santa Claus, Father Christmas, sometimes dresses in green. So he represents what the great British actor Sir Nigel Hawthorne called a lively expectation of favors to come. Silver balls embody gratitude for loved ones and past assistance. Blue represents repentance of past sins and errors and a reminder that forgiveness and divine acceptance await anyone who is truly sorry for their mistakes. Blue is a color associated with the Blessed Virgin Mary, who intercedes for lost and confused human beings.
Well, what about other traditions? Like candy canes were created by the head of a Cologne choir to keep his young charges quiet during a sacred service in 1670. The shape of the candy cane is reminiscent of a shepherd's crook. Jesus is often referred to as the Good Shepherd. And of course, when it's turned upside down, it's the letter J.
Gingerbread houses often have a long and diverse history. Honey cakes were given as an offering to the Roman god Vulcan. The Greeks knew him as Hephaestus, the god of forges and blacksmithing, as far back as 2,600 years ago. Since he was believed to have mobility problems, having been thrown out of the heavens, the cakes would give him the strength to make the iron brace he used to walk with, as well as to lift himself out of his 3-ton chariot. As someone with an exceptionality, I would certainly benefit from that strength. There is an Irish legend of a fourth wise man who didn't arrive in time to see the Christ child, wandered the world for 33 years, and finally offered his gift of ginger, the Messiah, just before his scourging by the Roman soldiers. Gingerbread, as it's known today, is an adaptation of medieval culinary practices, and it was created by secular baking guilds and German monks alike. A very delicious treat, Lebkuchen, it's a cookie similar to gingerbread, began in Bavaria in the 13th century and migrated throughout Western Europe in the next 300 years. Now, let's take a look at another important secular tradition, the idea of gift giving. The Roman Empire, as we mentioned, had an 8-day festival in December called Saturnalian. It's mentioned in our holiday podcast if you want more details, but it's similar to Mardi Gras in Louisiana or the Brazilian Carnival. Society turns upside down for a week. Masters wait on slaves as well as giving themselves and their families simple gifts. On the 6th day of that festival, there's a sacred dinner in which exotic foods not normally eaten for the rest of the year are served. Upon the Christianization of Rome in the 4th century, story of the Magi, the kings and Zoroastrian priests from the East giving gifts to Jesus Christ, was used to justify a celebration of the birth of the Savior on December the 25th. Then in the 5th century, the bishop Nicholas of Myra in Turkey gave presents to children and money to young brides so they would have a dowry and not be forced into either starvation or prostitution. This saint would be adopted into the beloved figure of Santa Claus, known by many names all over the world. If you want another amusing tale, my friends, listen to our Oscar the Grouch podcast for details about the red Russian bird, Oskab, and his adventures with the blue-clad Russian gift giver, Grandfather Frost. The two colors for Christmas seem to be red and green. As we said before, Norse people and Druids put evergreen berries in their homes to ward off evil spirits and symbolize new life. The color of red was adapted from the apples offered to Adam and Eve on the tree of knowledge in paradise. Dr. Weaver, you discovered something very interesting about another custom.
Yeah, I did. One of the things that we did in preparing for this podcast was to ask questions like, where does this come from? What is this? And I had wondered why Santa Claus says, ho, 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 ho. Well, okay. This phrase is so iconic that the Canadian Post Office uses ho, ho, ho as its postal code for children's letters to Santa. But the words originated in another Dickens story about the Goblin King. The phrase represented unrestricted, unrestrained laughter, a so-called belly laugh. Since Santa is grandfatherly and large figure, he embodies both age and warmth. We discovered this through the Best Life website's list of hidden Christmas facts. Many of us have family traditions that come out of our heritage and individual experiences. My family had a couple of interesting traditions, which I have learned came from Scotland and Germany. Didn't know that before, but yeah. Family and friends in my family gathered a layette, clothes and necessities for infants, and we delivered the gifts to an expectant mother on Christmas Eve without announcing we were coming or revealing our identities. Sort of, I guess, a take on the Magi going to give birth gifts to Jesus at his birth. When we got home, we brought the tree in and left it undecorated, as our parents did the decorating after the kids went to bed. Me and my sibs went to bed. The next morning, my sibs and I lined up in age order from youngest to oldest to get the first present from my father.
That sounds like a really wonderful set of traditions. This has always been a doubly joyous time for me because my birthday is the day after Christmas. My beloved grandfather, Robert Leroux, was an artist. He made his living as a sign painter, but loved painting and creating art in all forms. And every Christmas, he would make beautiful paintings on our front window, a nativity scene, snowmen, all sorts of beloved holiday figures. And I have so many joyous memories of participating in that. I haven't really got the dexterity for great painting, but I did it anyway, and observing it as well. Now, my friends, my teaching both at Kane University and with my dear friends at Paper Mill Playhouse, as well as this podcast, perhaps my adult source of great joy.
It is important to mention other gift-giving winter festivals. The Jewish people remember the survival of the sacred oil of their temple during the Maccabean period. The story is 1 day's worth of oil lasted for 8 days. Well, what happened is this celebration is the festival of lights called Hanukkah. The candles on a menorah, which is a kind of candle holder, are lit and gifts are exchanged. The tradition behind Hanukkah goes back to 168 to 167 BCE, when the Greek Empire ruled Jerusalem. The Greeks wanted to support their religion and made Jewish ritual practice and Jewish land ownership become illegal. Jewish citizens were slaughtered in city streets, and the Great Temple was desecrated. In response, in 166 BCE, a Jewish resistance group called the Maccabees drove the Greeks from the land. As a part of the Greek desecration, the Greeks destroyed all the oil used in Jewish worship and rituals. The Maccabees found 1 jar of oil, which was enough for 1 day, but miraculously, it lasted for 8 days. So lighting the candles on the menorah, one each day, is symbolic of the resolve to bring light into the world.
A truly wonderful reminder of the Jewish people's many contributions to civilization and peace. More recently, in commemoration of African harvest festivals by the Zulu people in South Africa and Tanzania, Kwanzaa, the seventh-day celebration beginning on December 26th, was created in 1966. It was created by an African-American separatist leader, Mulana, that means guide, Krenga. Black, green, and red candles are lit every evening, taken from the Pan-African colors of the great civil rights leader Marcus Garvey in the early 20th century. And there are distribution of gifts specifically related to the 7 sacred principles of this holiday. They are unity, self-determination, collective responsibility and work, purpose, cooperative economics, and faith.
We could go on for another hour because, as usual, we discover so many things as we research for this podcast. That aspect of this podcast, of doing this podcast, is one of my favorite parts. It always reminds me that I have so much to learn.
Indeed, I do also. I've been so blessed over this past year to learn from so many. My students at Paper Mill and Kane, the wonderful men and women who have participated in this podcast in many ways, my family, they've all given me a great deal of guidance and joy. And may I say, Dr. Weaver, your patience in dealing with some of the details involved in putting this together and exerting Herculean effort has been an example. You've also shown me how to present ideas with grace, make them interesting, and turn arcane, elaborate reality into something individuals care about. Creating this podcast has served as both a mental workout, a source of pleasure, and an affirmation of the reason I became a history teacher in the first place, to bring those realities out, to explore those exciting hidden details within history.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. Working with you and benefiting from your vast store of information has been a pleasure. Absolutely. It's also been a pleasure to work with some of our contributors, such as Leslie Finelli, John, Patrick and Dawn McKenna-Kehoe, Lisa Eisenhower, Zach Vasquez, Patrick Ryan, Olivier George, Hannah Finelli, and I'm probably missing some.
I also want to give my special thanks to Dr. James Harrison, the Deputy Director of the Smithsonian Museum of Native Americans, for his information, support, friendship, and advice. I'm very excited, friends, to tell you a little bit about the new alternative history podcast, History Twists, that we are preparing to premiere. Alternative history is something that I've had an interest in for many years, and I was delighted, Dr. Weaver, when you brought up the idea of doing this. As with anything worthwhile, we have found that a significant amount of research is necessary and fun to make this understandable and practical, as well, along with the creative part of making plausible conjectures as to how things could have turned out differently. There are many areas of history in which a minor divergence could have led to a completely different outcome, and that different outcome led to an almost different world.
Indeed, the History Twist podcast reminds me of something that goes to the heart of this podcast. If you have followed us, you've heard us mention boots on the ground history. Well, part of that underlying principle to boots on the ground history is that history is relevant to today and tomorrow. I know that is something near and dear to your heart, Dr. Deneen, and something you strive to impart to your students. In History Twists, we will not just indulge in wild trips of fantasy. We will present concrete information upon which conjectures can be based. We hope to include the ideas of many others, including students, in the hope that history can become more than dates, names, ancient facts. And certainly, this is not beyond the thoughts or the capacities of everyday people.
On the contrary, I would say it's part of their experience and capacity as well. For me, history has always been a source of intellectual support as well as spiritual guidance, even with the people whose stories we've told here over these past year and a half. Sometimes you'll laugh, friends, but this is true. In times of great stress and challenge, I think to myself, what would our liberated slave leader, Caesar Drake, the great American industrialist Marjorie Post, or propaganda genius Wang Sheng do in a time of crisis? It helps me stay focused and think better.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we need to bring this podcast or this episode of the podcast to an end. I hope you've enjoyed listening today and maybe learning a few interesting details. If you've enjoyed any of it, please give us a like, subscribe, feel free to make comments, and if you feel like something is just telling you this is something you should get in on and you would like to participate, contribute, drop us a line. We are open. So long for now.
May I give everyone here all my good wishes, our good wishes for a blessed holiday and a peaceful and happy new year. 2024 will bring us many wonderful podcasts and other surprises as well. Thank you, my friends.